Refresh.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. So we are recording. Okay. Good. All right. So Muneera, you are the Executive Director and founder of Neighbors Helping Neighbors on the main line. And do you identify as Black?
I do. I have a little story that goes behind this if you want to hear it, Molly.
Yeah.
Because I have always identified as Black, but I am mixed race. My mother is white and my father is Black. And I was born in the 60s. So, I have been through a lot of dynamics as a biracial person in this country. So when I was in my early 20s, I worked for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania briefly for just a couple of years. And after the hiring process, a couple of weeks into my job, I got a phone call from corporate office, and they said there was a mistake on my application that I needed to correct. And I was perplexed because I'm pretty diligent, but it turns out they said when it came to race, I checked 2 boxes. And I said, well, that wasn't a mistake. That is my identity. I'm one of 2 races. And they said, well, you can't do that. Our application will only allow you to check 1 box. And I said, well, then, what box would you have me check? I am half of both, and I knew what they, were doing, but I felt like that was so demeaning and unfair and so outside of what anyone should ever ask someone to do, is choose a side of their identity when it's all mixed together and it just flows in the perfect way. So finally, they said if I didn't make a choice, I was going to have to leave work and I wouldn't be able to return until I decided which identity I wanted to, list. So I told them, well, I'll tell you what, I celebrate both sides of my heritage. I would never pick one side over another. But if you were to walk in the door today, you would say I'm Black. So while I'm not going to tell you it's my preference for you to check off only one category, I'm going to leave that for you to decide what you have to do for your paperwork. And that's how we left it. And they were so surprised because they said, well, you sound white. And I said, okay, so therein lies more of the problem, I knew I identified as Black, and I don't have any issues with that. There was never anything dishonoring to my mother's heritage or that part of me. I celebrate that in me as well. I know what, how that has lent to shaping who I am. But I do identify, I did always identify as Black, but I wasn't going to give them that because, it just was just the wrong thing to do for them to do. And I was so disappointed and disheartened. And that's what really, I think, gave me my first adult view of just how skewed our government is, So.
Yeah. Gosh, how traumatizing. And like, I just have a few reactions. But one is like, we've come such a long way, but at the same time, not really, because it's still like the same issues that young people face. Like you say so eloquently, like having to check a box on your identity. It's not fair. It doesn't honor the complexities of our identities. And yeah, that they made you do that, or else like stop working. It's very, very traumatizing, very demeaning. And I'm sorry you had that experience, but I mean, gosh, it must be so representative of what so many people experience. Sadly.
Daily.
Yeah.
Daily. It's always something.
Yeah.
Today it's something.
My goodness. And thank you for sharing that. That's a really, I think, a good jumping off point for getting into the other questions, more of this conversation. Before we do that, beyond the organization's board chair or executive director, can you describe the degree of Black leadership within Neighbors Helping Neighbors? And I think it's a small organization, so maybe you can speak to employees or whatever you think is appropriate.
Okay, well, yeah, employees and team leadership both. So we are actually pretty heavily led, by Black members of Neighbors Helping Neighbors. Our administrator is Black, and our educational platform leadership is a Black woman. Our teams are made up of many races, but the heads of our teams are more Black leaders than other races. I did not intentionally create a whole team of leaders who are Black, but then again, I did, because out of my network, they were the highest skilled at what I needed them to do. And they understand the dynamics of race personally. And there were some things that were being missed by some team members that I needed an extra oversight on from someone who is Black and has had the Black experience. So the nature of our work is so sensitive for families, and we're dealing with children. And I'm very careful that the right form of representation and the right solutions are derived from, very strategically looking at all angles. And unless you've had the Black experience, you can't look from that angle. So.
That makes sense. And I think, am I right? And I mean, you mentioned leadership and team leads, being able to relate with the program participants and beneficiaries, which are children and also families and adults. I think I saw the stat that, I don't have it in front of me, but about 80 or 90% of your program beneficiaries are Black.
That's correct.
And I would imagine, and now this is totally not a prepared question, but it's just coming up. I mean, this is important in general, being a Black person in America, but I would also assume, or maybe I should ask, if the main line is a particular environment for being Black, and if that experience is different than, for example, Philadelphia or any other region nearby or across the country. Is that true?
I would say so. Especially in comparison to Philadelphia, where we, you can see much more mixing and blending. Of course, there are pockets, but overall, as a city, you can go down any street and see the different races. That's not true of Lone Marion. We are very specifically pocketed in an area, by and large. Of course, we do have Black people in the other communities, the more affluent communities of Lone Marion, and I don't ever mean to make an impression that we don't, because certainly we do. But historically and geographically, as a community in Lower Merion, not only are we pocketed because of the fact that those houses used to be houses that were for the working and serving community. So they're smaller houses, and they're row homes. We have a fair amount of row homes in our pocket, and that of course came from servitude. And but then we live generationally in those houses, and a lot of us choose not to leave, not because we're economically bound to that community, but because that's where we're comfortable. We are one entire family in South Ardmore, and again in Bryn Mawr we have a pocket similar. So some of it is by history, some of it is by choice, a lot of it is by choice, and some of it is driven by economic, you know, position that families may be in. So with that said, we have other pockets of communities in our other areas of the township where, I mean, people still call the police if they see a Black child walking down the street bouncing a basketball. Literally, literally. They can be their neighbor. They could live 3 doors down, and they still will suffer, you know, the call and the stop and the humiliation, regardless of how affluent their family is. So you don't, you know, we're working on it. That's what I'll say, is that we are working on it together as a township and as a neighborhood. That's what Neighbors Helping Neighbors is working to change.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Muneera.
Sure.
So moving into some of the meatier questions of this interview, I wanted to ask you, what does Black equity mean in the context of Neighbors Helping Neighbors? So I think you just described that a little bit. And then how does the concept of Black equity show up in the organization's leadership practices, operations, and service delivery?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Black equity really should just be called equity. You know, it shouldn't have a color attached to it. It shouldn't have a gender attached to it. It shouldn't have anything attached to it. You know, the sad fact is that Black equity is something that we still have to fight for in 2021. So with Neighbors Helping Neighbors, you know, if we have to dip the bar down a little bit so that someone can get over it, you know, we will. If we have to raise the bar somewhere else to block something from happening to a family, then I do. And everything we do with Neighbors Helping Neighbors is very confidential and very tailored to what each specific family needs, and even further down to what each individual in a family needs. So, you know, whatever I have to do to get done what they need done in order to give them a better position, a better chance, and a better outcome, then that's what we do at Neighbors Helping Neighbors. And I'm very clear about it with the school district and the township and the police department. And I tell them, you know, bluntly, and I mean it, I'm not on any of the payrolls. So I get to do what I feel is fair for our families. And that comes through in the work that we do. And it also gives those entities and, another avenue that they've never really had before. Because if it's something that their hands are tied on, it's something that they know I will jump immediately into action on. So it's creating a system within our township and our communities that is allowing for Black equity, and not only allowing for it, but insisting on it.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that Neighbors Helping Neighbors serves the region, but you have really leveraged your connections within the township to start making the greatest impact in Lower Merion Township. And that looks, for me, a lot of what you just said is talking about, and I think you brought up the word system, but it's making systemic change. And so could you just tell me a little bit more about what other systemic partnerships you have? So you mentioned the school district, the police department. What does that look like? And are there any other like bigger structures that you partner with in this effort to change how the system operates?
Yeah. You know what? Really, I go wherever the need is, and I put our strongest voice in place. So when I go to township meetings or when I sit down with the police department or whoever I'm working with, I make sure that they understand that these are not my views that I'm presenting. I am representing the views of our community, having taken the steps first to find out exactly what our community wants and how they feel about issues. So with that said, it's a myriad. It runs the gamut. It's whatever comes up. With a police department, we have a history of racially profiled stops in Lower Merion Township. So much so that I've actually, in this work, I've had conversations with people from Philadelphia who have told me that they've spent their entire careers driving extra miles and extra hours to go around Lower Merion Township so as to not have to pass through there because of the past treatment of Black drivers. You were guaranteed to be stopped if you looked a little different. So in our work, I'm really proud of the work that our police department is doing. And they, have a team of community members that they meet with, and, regularly they have a board and, that they confide in and that they work with. And any of us are in the community are free to participate in those meetings anytime. And one of the things that I'm known for is I'll pull over and I'll watch the stop. I've been doing that for years. So much so that the officers, all they know me, and they just, they make sure, they know that I know the proper distance to stay away from, so that it doesn't interfere with their investigation. But they also know that that's Miss Walker and she's there. She's going to be there until everything is over and done. And, and I don't do that to put pressure on them, but then I do. Because there are we have had some officers in the past that needed pressure put on them. They weren't going to have it be a fair, interaction or fair outcome. And I'm really glad to say and proud to say that we have a ton of officers now who are very conscientious. They have been treating people fairly. I've been getting reports from people in the community and from in Philadelphia who have said they had a totally different experience with our police department with a traffic stop. I don't know what those stops were. I don't know if it was warranted that they got stopped in the first place, but the way it was handled, they felt was better than what they would have ever expected from Lower Merion. And you have to applaud that. And I feel like it's okay to meet people where they're at and help them to where they want to get to. And our police department made the decision that they were going to do better in this regard, and it's intentional, and they are doing the legwork, and the fruits of it are showing up in the community. This is another way that we're working to create equity, and particularly Black equity within our township. We deserve the same rights as every other citizen.
Mhm, mhm. And all of this change that has happened, is there a formal way that you've been working with school district, police department, or is it literally just because you show up to the meetings and you do your part and you raise your hand and you stop at all the stops? Or have they brought you in to lead any like workshops for them?
So both.
Okay.
It started by me joining a bunch of committees at other people's request. And the more involved I got, and the more I was able to understand the system and what was happening, and as importantly, what was not happening, the more the district began to confide in me for understanding and for guidance. In, so yeah, I have done special programming within the district, and I've done that with with the staff. I've done it with the students. I've done it with the parents, and I've ad- given advice, to superintendent, to the communications department, to, just anyone within the structure that needs guidance in a way that I can give, which is that I can give the answer of representation of the Black community. And I can give them, our perspective. I can give them our stance. I can give them our needs, and I can give them our wants, and I can give them our demands. And they respect that at this stage, because they know that I am equally fair in representing to our community and to others what the district is doing right, what the district is doing good, what the district is trying to do, but may not just, have figured out quite how to do it yet, but they're working with those of us that do know. And all that has to be respected. And they respect me and my work equally.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So, and I might send you an email later just to get like specific names, like if you remember any of the committee names you were on.
Sure.
I'll send you an email asking for that.
That's fine.
Okay, that's good. I think that'll be great to demonstrate your level of activity and commitment through those.
Well, you can't provide answers if you're missing pieces of the puzzle. So you have to gather all your pieces first, put your puzzle together, and know that you're presenting, a complete picture before you open your mouth. And yeah, that's a step that a lot of people skip. And it's crucial and it's integral. And that's why Neighbors Helping Neighbors was able to be built so quickly in response to COVID, because I had already done all the work to put the puzzle together.
I love that. So piggybacking off of that, can you describe Neighbors Helping Neighbors work with Black communities and in the area that you serve, and the specific social issues that you address in your work, and how does that work then lead to Black equity?
Sure. Well, you said a mouthful there. But okay, so Neighbors Helping Neighbors developed in response to COVID, food insecurity, um, and it quickly spawned into help with educational practices, the need to go virtual quickly, you know, um, and we developed systems that not only worked for the response to COVID, but actually addressed the needs that families had all along prior to COVID that just weren't being answered for a number of reasons. A number of reasons. Some because the things that were available to them weren't available at times or in ways that they could take advantage of them. So they went without. Some because some of our entities are still run by people or people have a hand in it who do not have our community's best interest at heart. Um, so for those reasons and others, it was really past time for Neighbors Helping Neighbors to be formed and for all of the issues to be addressed. So with that said, I mean, there are just there's a number of ways that we've been working to create Black equity within our township, our school district. One of the ways, which is a huge issue for us generationally, is in regards to special education, because our families have had their children put in special education with the immediate assumption that they would not be able to handle the work or the curriculum of Lower Merion School District. So going in the door in kindergarten, they already.
Sorry, you're referring to Black students.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. I am referring to Black students, but what I find is that the Latina students experience a lot of the same. So we also are strong advocates for them. We're advocates for all students. I've had white students that this has happened to too, where an assumption was made that they would not be able to learn the same. And coming in the door in kindergarten, they were taught differently. But habitually, it has happened to the Black community and generationally. So when I was a product of the district, I joined the district in 65. And so my classmates who were Black were put in special education. And it was well known that the district was receiving certain government monies for X number of students to be in special education. And the decision was made, and it was clear if any students were going to be forfeited, it was going to be us. My mother, as a white woman, would not allow that for her 6 Black children. But the times were not such that it translated to other Black families as well. So, we have instances where the district was called to carpet and forced to treat some of us well. But a lot of our families did not have that representation. And that speaks to the generational nature of it, because some of the parents didn't want to go back through those school doors because of their experiences. And others, maybe they were working and the district didn't find a way to allow for a time for them to be there and to advocate for their kids. And, it goes on and on and on. The reasons why are endless, but the end result is that our children are at a much higher rate put into special education programming than others. And that's still occurring. And that's one of the things that we unearthed with Neighbors Helping Neighbors, because we, through our one-on-one tutoring platform, we were able to work with students virtually for this last year and a half now and bring them on par with their peers. And so we have some students who are exiting special education and are either coming out or are set to come out within the next 2 years or so transition time. They will be out of special education because they didn't belong in there in the first place. They just needed someone to care enough to teach them properly and to know that they could learn equally, right? So what Neighbors Helping Neighbors is doing is that whole catch-up process. You're not necessarily working with them because they need help with these skills because they don't understand the skills. We're working with them to catch them up on these skills because they don't understand the skills because they were never taught the skills properly. And there's a big difference. So these are the things that Neighbors Helping Neighbors are committed to do and to continue to do until we have a complete and fair level of equity across the board for everyone.
So, and do you happen to have numbers? Do you know how many students, or can I follow up with an email and ask for that number?
You can follow up with an email, yeah, because our numbers fluctuate weekly with the food initiative and with the educational programming, and we get more add-ons than we get people coming off, but we do have some people who come off of the food initiative because of COVID. Now they're back to work and they don't need the assistance anymore. So I still encourage them to take it because I say, let us handle that part of your budget and you take that money and put it somewhere else so that you can grow your family finances with our help. So whether you put it on another bill or whether you put it in the bank or whatever you want to do with it, I encourage them to continue to get the food, continue to get the school supplies we provide, continue to get the things that we give away, that others are generously donating to help even this score. Take these things so that you can use your money on other things and increase your position, your household, right? Yeah.
Right. It reminds me of the metaphor, the comparison of like equity versus assistance, right? And what you're doing is equity because you're saying, even if on paper you don't need this particular donation right now, take it because that can be leveraged for, another resource.
Right.
So yeah, that makes sense.
So it's the opposite of what's always been done to people of our culture, right? It's the exact opposite. What we're used to is people taking away from our ability to have purposely, right? So now I'm intentionally adding even what they think they don't need because they just have to see it from another way,
So do you think that like nonprofits or like aid programs can actually do damage sometimes because of exactly what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do. I do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Okay. So I think what you're saying is, and what makes Neighbors Helping Neighbors different from another kind of like aid program is the whole equity piece, the whole piece around, I hate the phrase like level playing field, but I mean, you're making the game fair almost through direct assistance and through advocacy in the at the community level.
Right.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, I'm glad you brought this up because, that speaks to the point of grants and of assistance from the government and others for nonprofits like ours, and, you have to have X percentage of this, kind of person, and you have to have that percentage of that kind of person, and they have to fall within this income limit, and they have to know, listen, that's not enough for us to make things fair and even. No assumption should be made that someone who's Black and has a nice bank account is not suffering from disparities of this, that this nation puts on Black people. You can't create equity unless you fix everything for everybody. So some of the problem, that we have when we apply for grants, well, we're too young, we're too new, we don't service enough people, we don't do. What we're doing is literally creating equity, literally creating Black equity by force, by choice, right? By choice. And to be pigeonholed and not qualify for monies that are set aside to create equity is the same backwards process that got us in this mess in the first place. Right? It was an intentional decision long ago to set up a backward system for Black people.
Yep. Wow.
So, there are a lot of people who are making their absolute best intentions to help. And I applaud that, and I meet them where they're at. But what I want them to know is that whenever they block or put into a pending status groups like ours, what they're really doing is elongating the path to social equity.
So I think that something that has come out in this conversation that I was aware of, but maybe didn't understand fully, was the fact that even though Neighbors Helping Neighbors is a new nonprofit, the work was really just formalized because of the pandemic. The work was already happening in a lot of ways, especially the advocacy piece, which you have been doing as an individual, as a civic community member before Neighbors Helping Neighbors came into existence.
Absolutely.
So I have some ideas, but leaving that for another conversation. How long would you say, how many years have you been doing this direct advocacy work on the district level, police department, community level?
Probably close to a decade. I was drawn into the work by some other community members who were trying to make headway with the school district, and were, it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening for a number of reasons. It wasn't happening. And they asked me to get involved, and I said, that's not my niche. And they said, no, it really is. You just don't know it. Please get involved. And so with hesitancy, I did. I'm sorry, excuse me. With hesitancy, I did. But they were right, and I have always had a passion for this type of fairness, since I was a little girl. I wanted every kitten to get the same time, milk time. And I want, you know what I mean? It's just in my nature.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing the work for about 10 years. Most of my work is heavily involved in the school district. Heavily. and then that, has expanded as well. I think, Molly, we've had a conversation once before where I told you that so in 2015, I did a brief documentary called We Are Lower Merion.
Hmm.
It's on YouTube. You can check it out if you haven't seen it. And that came from what I was seeing in the district in comparison to what I saw in the district when I was a student, from 65 to 79.
Mm-hmm.
So once I did that video and it did some other work in the district and people started to become aware of the work I was doing, I was approached at one point to help establish a workshop at Villanova University. And the goal was to address other the deans and other leaders from colleges in Pennsylvania in regards to diversity and equity. This was a few years ago. This was before the big wave, most recent wave, but things were beginning to, eyes were beginning to open and things were beginning to change. So at that point, and that all spurned off of something that they heard me say at a meeting about, the lack of the lack of diversity work that was being done in the district with staff and with the teachers, and how, if the teachers can't understand it and become aware of it and become intentional in it, then how in the world is it ever supposed to filter down to the child and to the parents? It won't work. It won't work. So when she asked me to speak to the heads of the colleges, I quickly jumped on that because I thought it was very important that I get a message to them that, listen, you are turning out students of education without training them in diversity. And that was a really pivotal moment for them. And many of them left and said, we're on this right away. Like, yeah, I don't know why we missed the fact that this wasn't included in our programming, but we have to get this in our programming, And so things like that, that's the way you can make a change. That's the way you can begin to steer people from where they are to where they are going or where they need to go, or where they may not even know they need to go. But but then once you can talk it out, they understand that that's where they need to go.
Great.
Again, it's a backwards process to send a teacher to teach a child when the teacher still needs to learn. Right.
So. Absolutely. So just to do a time check, it's 11:03. I know you have something you need to get to, right?
I do. I'm okay for a few minutes.
A few minutes?
Okay. Something else in.
So, I mean, this has been a great conversation for me personally, and of course for putting together this proposal. So I want to ask this question because it's very important for shaping the proposal. What do you think are Neighbors Helping Neighbors' top 3 capacity building needs? And do you mind if I make a comment right now, just from our conversation?
Sure.
So, and I'll actually mention the logic model. So I sent you a logic model. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it.
I did get a chance to look at it.
So
good work.
It's interesting because I think the way that Neighbors Helping Neighbors has communicated its programming and its activities is through these 3 areas, right? Food assistance and educational support and resources. Connections, but I actually think there could be a 4th activity area which hasn't been captured yet, which is all the advocacy work you're doing. Because something that's come out from this conversation is that we can provide all the support, but unless we're making systemic changes, it's always going to stay the same. And Neighbors Helping Neighbors is doing both, but I think that as an organization, we could start communicating that more clearly. so that it's obvious, you know, on the website, on any materials, that we are doing, you know, these three areas of programming and advocacy to change systems level.
Yeah.
So that's just the comment I was going to make, and I don't know if you agree or not.
Well, I do, and I appreciate you mentioning it. And you know, I think hopefully what you heard in my description of how I came to do the work is, you know, I had to do my own work first.
Mhm.
You know, I had to do my own homework. I had to, you know, see everything that was happening, and then I had to sit down and think, you know, for a very long time before I opened my mouth.
Mhm.
And you know that when we, you know, the stronger we make ourselves, the stronger we can make others. And then the stronger we make others, the stronger we can make our society as a whole,
Mhm.
right? The more balanced things can become, right? So yeah, I agree with what you said. And I just, yeah, I'm not one to really talk much about what I do unless I'm asked. So I
Mhm.
think maybe that could be my own personal reason why you don't
Mhm.
see that as part of the kind of NHN structure. But you're right, it is exactly the backbone, and it all stems from that.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Right, right. Because without all of that work that you're doing, um, you know, and I'm not saying that this is true, but I'm saying an outsider could perceive these interventions as like band-aid solutions, but they're not, because of all of this deep, deep, deep community connections and advocacy you're doing. So I think if we could find a way to capture that and communicate it as an organizational priority or an organizational activity, it could really bolster, you know, how foundations are seeing neighbors helping neighbors, how, you know, any external person, I guess.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I'm glad you said it because, you know, that whole Band-Aid perception is true. You know, you could think, oh, well, families need food. They're getting food to them. Okay, so what's it, everybody, right?
mm,
But no, but what we're doing is that we've taken neighbors of affluence, and maybe they're delivering food to someone in a completely different economical position, not
mm,
based off of race, based off of economics, because we don't want to confuse the two ever, uh,
mhm, mhm,
which happens to us a lot.
mhm,
But you know, one level of economy working to help another person of a different um, demographic, you know, status, and they're becoming friends.
mhm,
They're getting to know who each other are. They
mhm,
see each other in the store. They're happy
mhm,
to see each other on the street. They're getting to know who their children each, you know,
mhm,
have and are. It's creating bonds between the most normally unexpected pairings. Um, that would never really occur in a place like Lower Merion Township,
mhm.
you know? Um, you know,
Right,
they see each other, they're like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. Where have you been? You know, or how are
yeah,
you? I was worried about you, or you know, they leave notes out for each other because we have a
right.
contactless system. But they wave from the car, or they talk from the front
Mhm,
door. They do, you know what I mean? And it's creating bonds, unexpected bonds
mhm,
that it's really changing our township and our neighborhoods, you know?
mhm,
So, you know, that's with the food system and then the educational system, the programming. I mean, we have a township commissioner who is tutoring a small refugee little girl who came
mhm,
by way of Africa. I mean, in the commissioner's home, she's
mhm,
like invite them in once everybody's vaccinated in the
mhm,
yard, you know, or
mhm.
whatever. But of course, socially distanced property. I
Yeah.
don't want to get the impression not, but when would you normally have a commissioner invite a 5-year-old little black girl to her house. Like it
Yeah.
wouldn't happen. Why would it
Yeah.
ever happen? Not that
Yeah.
they wouldn't do it, not that it's not in their hearts to do.
Right. Right.
It just wouldn't happen had it not been for the Band-Aid type of
Mhm.
things that we're doing,
Right.
right? So you're right. They're absolutely not Band-Aids. They're the Band-Aid, they're the medicine, they're the prayer, the everything that goes into healing.
Yep.
Right?
And Neighbors Helping Neighbors has healing in right up front in your mission statement. And so, you know, logic models, like whatever, they're helpful sometimes, you know, in terms of quantifying mission statements, you know, quantifying activities and defining what those activities are. So I think if we can connect, or if we can build out, you know, a column, an area that shows, you know, how Neighbors Helping Neighbors is succeeding in healing and creating connections, I think that could be really helpful. So I can think about that and send you ideas. But that was a big divergence.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. Yeah.
But I asked that then because I was wondering if maybe you would agree that advocacy could be a capacity building area that we would identify. But what do you want to just maybe answer that question and then we can leave the others?
Yes. That's my answer. Yes. As a fourth.
Okay, so
pillar. Yes.
and they ask for 3 areas, 3 capacity building needs. So do you want to say advocacy, which is everything we just talked about? So I can elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Had you identified any other areas?
I did, and actually you told me you were going to ask this, so I did write a couple things down. So so you know, we have a lot of projected programming that we want to do for students and for adults. And I think that's where we'll get a lot of answers and progress as well, you know. So not just my advocacy with entities, but also, you know, our individual advocacy that we do with each student, you know, to promote their confidence and, you know, increase their skills in areas that things that aren't addressed at school or aren't done at school, but that are needed to have a well-rounded understanding of, you know, when you understand life skills and when you understand morals and you understand, you know, these other equally large facets of development, that aids with your learning in school as well. You know, the more you can put together the whole pie, you know, the more you understand mathematical concepts, you know, scientific pairing, you know, it's all part and parcel of a complete learning, right? So of course, you know, our educational platform, that's a column of itself. And this is why, because there's nothing as precious as, you know, like when we had a virtual school for families who couldn't stay home with their children during virtual school, or didn't know how to teach their kids well enough how to use the computer and get in and out of the classes and all that. You know, during that time, we had some really precious moments with students where just because we sat next to them and we explained it in a more natural, more typical life experience kind of way, they got a concept that they were just beating themselves up for and thinking they were less than for not understanding.
Mm.
But through our just real and regular conversation,
Mhm.
that light bulb goes off,
Mhm.
and they get it, and they're proud that they get it, and they know they'll never lose it.
Mhm.
And then they start thinking of other ways that it applies in the
Mhm.
other work that they're doing in this class or that class or that class.
Mm.
Nothing more precious than that. It's
Mhm.
nothing more precious than that. And really, Molly, doing that with one student, or doing it with, maybe I'm approached by a middle-aged white man that says, I see what's happening, but I don't know how the heck to do anything about it because I don't get it. Like,
Mhm.
it was never a part of my day, and I hate that it is a part of your day, but I don't know what to do.
Mhm.
Having those same types of
Mhm.
conversations with him as I
Mhm.
did with the student. Yeah.
Mhm. I
So
love that.
that's what makes that
I'm gonna call that the
so important.
NHN method. I like that.
Yeah.
NHN method of communicating.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, and I think another area that I think is very important is, as we return to in person, I know that one of the things that we really would like is a van or a vehicle of our own that we can pick people up who don't have the ability to get to some of our program, or
Mhm.
won't have the ability. Maybe mom's working, or maybe, grandmom doesn't drive, or maybe, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. Maybe we
Mhm.
have special programming for seniors and they need to be picked up, whatever we need to do in order to help facilitate all the things that we've just discussed.
Mhm.
Transportation is going to be key as we move forward.
Mhm.
And of course, it helps us with our food initiative,
Mhm.
too. So,
And you guys have the space, right? Is that confirmed or?
and we just, just yesterday, we're granted an opportunity to rent a space right in the heart of our community. And it's a place that has been used, it's owned by one of the churches, and it has been used as classrooms and
Wow.
offices. And so it's all set up and basically
Wow.
ready for us.
Wow.
And we are all set to lock in a September 15th lease for 6 months.
Amazing.
We
Okay.
so far we have the funding to be able to have the space for 6 months. And
Okay.
prayerfully, before that 6 months is up, we get funding to sustain us for the next 6 months and the next
Wow.
years and then the years after that. Because as you see, this work is not going to happen in a day. It didn't create in a
Mm.
day, and it's not going to end in a day or a year or a decade.
Mhm.
This is a life's work,
Mm.
and I need to be able to sustain this one way or another. And
Mhm.
it's a lot easier to do it from a space. But as you know, it started out in my bedroom, roll over, because the emails would wake me up before my alarm clock,
Mhm.
and I'd go to sleep drafting an email for something else, that transpired.
Yeah.
So, you know, um, so
Wow.
I can and will, do it any way that we can, because I have such great support
Mhm.
from all of our neighbors and our huge NHN network.
Mhm.
It makes it much easier, and our programming will be much more successful being able to have a space to work out of and to
Mm.
invite people to, in the proper ways as we work our way through this pandemic. Because this pandemic has changed things for even for families who were not struggling before. They're going to be struggling for quite some time. And the ones
Mhm.
who were struggling before will really be struggling for quite some time.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's just the realistic, you know,
Mhm.
and sad part of this whole thing. But if we can use that time properly, and we continue to make the changes that we're making, I'm very confident. I'm very confident that our community is going to be in a much better place. We already are. We
Yeah, you already
are.
are. I was gonna say exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big things happening.
Big things.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
super exciting.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll let you go. I know you you can't stay here all day. You have real things to do. So
This is real, honey bunch. This is real.
this is real. This is real. This is real. But you have, people to interact with and
Yeah.
activities to lead. So there were a couple other questions I didn't get to ask. Do you prefer if I email them to you, or if I maybe call you at some other point just to get through them
You
quickly?
can call me. I think, I typically prefer conversation better because I may say something that makes you think of something, and you may say something that makes me think of something. And then instead of going back and forth in emails with oops, and I meant to say, conversation just always, I think, is very good for me as a means of communication. So
Okay.
we can
Great.
handle them by phone call.
All right, that sounds good.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Muneera. This was really powerful, and thank you for opening up and sharing this perspective of your work and of your life.
You're welcome, and thank you. And thanks for all the hard work you're doing for Neighbors Helping Neighbors and have been doing since our inception. So I really appreciate you. I really do.
It's a pleasure. It's been great working together.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, Muneera. Well, have a good rest of your day. I'll text you then.
You too. Kiss that baby for me.
Thank you. I will.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.